Don't drink Cokes. They're bad for you. Do as I say, not as I do.
You talking to me? Oh.
Thus spake Zarathustra. And please ignore the voice of my young, shapely assistant in the background. Hello! And welcome to another exciting episode of You Don't Know. You don't know, huh? So don't act like you do. Because then something bad might happen to you. And I'm talking to you. Welcome to first Patreon show. We're happy to be a member of the Patreon community now. And if you're watching this show, that means you're paying X amount of dollars a month to subscribe to this Patreon channel. And let me tell you, thank you. You have my heartfelt appreciation and sincere appreciation. One thing I'd like to make clear. We're not listening to the marketing team. We're not getting rid of this, that, and the other. Oh! We're staying with it. Naysayers be damned, huh? And YouTube, I mean, YouTube's YouTube, right? So, as they continue to crack down on truthers and people in the truther community, you may have noticed that on my show, You Don't Know, we rarely, if ever, discuss lone gunman scenarios or alleged lone gunman scenarios. Except, of course, we had Ole Demigard on the show twice, and that's what he speaks almost exclusively about. And there's a reason why we don't talk about that on YouTube. That is the one thing that if you talk about on YouTube, you will get your channel yanked. And yes, I'm talking about Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook, Wolf, what's his name? I'll think of his name here in a second. The man who investigated Sandy Hook. He was one of the, or is one of the nation's, he's retired now, one of the nation's top criminal investigators. You know, he's a hard-nosed dick, and he knows how to, you know, find his man. And when he heard the rumors about Sandy Hook, that it was all fake, that it wasn't real, he was so incensed, he was so outraged at this, that he decided to spend his own time and resources to go and prove that Sandy Hook was real. Well, that forever changed his life, because he didn't get too far into the investigation until he started seeing, what the fuck? Yes, it's all fake. There was no kids, there was no school, none of that shit. That school wasn't even open. That whole town is under mind control. It happens to be the headquarters of the Church of Satan up until recently. And Connecticut's kind of weird anyway, you know. They got a bunch of rich folks up there in Connecticut, Vermont, shit like that, you know. Anyway, so it's all very fascinating. But if you want to, you know, seize the day and grab a sword, pull it out of the stone, and then miss the stump, then don't miss a second time. And let me just mention, don't ever be caught by surprise. That's my number one advice for today. Today's show is don't be caught by surprise. Don't ever be caught by surprise. Don't ever be caught by surprise. Ah, you got caught by surprise. No, no, no. Oh, when will you learn? When will you learn? Okay, so we're here to talk about on today's episode one of the most jarring and subjects that brings cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when an idea is so radical, so outside of the mindset or the belief system that you've been indoctrinated into since you were a child, that it literally hurts your head and gives you a headache, or you just can't process it. It doesn't matter what logical part of your brain you use. These ideas. Now, a good example of this would be the flat Earth theory. Okay, I don't have much to say about the flat Earth theory. I believe in the global model of the Earth, as in that the Earth is a globe. I do find it frustrating, however, that all of the facts seem to support the flat earthers. You know, that is a bit frustrating. But we're not going to waste any time on that. What I'm here to tell you about today is something you've probably heard of before because it's come about in the last year, and this is the hottest conspiracy theory that's out there. Bar none, it's hotter than sin, and yes, I'm talking about the Tartarian Empire. And its two sister subjects, mud flood and star forts. If you've been following this, you have to really pay attention and delve into it and investigate it before you see the reality of it. And let me tell you, it's absolutely real. Another component, you might say sister subject, that ties in with Tartarian Empire, with mud flood, and with star forts, and that is World's Fair. The World's Fair. What is I myself went to the World's Fair and back in the 70s. Oh shit, I just stated myself. Anyway, sometime back then, and it was in Seattle, Washington, in that year. Seattle's an interesting town. But yeah, and little did I know that there was a nefarious side, a diabolical side to these World's Fairs. And the reason for that is because of the reason why the World Fair system was created to begin with, and that is to cover up buildings, ancient buildings that are even right around us right now. And you can probably find some if you live in a big enough city, downtown area of the city that you live in. Maybe even the state capitol, maybe even the post office, or one of these big old-timey prisons. We're talking about a style of architecture which has gone under several different names. Some of it's more Greco-Roman styles. Victorian is a name that they use often to describe this type of architecture. And yes, certainly these buildings exist. We know they exist, but certainly many of these buildings were built when they said they were. But some of the most intricate ones and some of the most beautiful ones and just stunning works of architecture were not at all built when they said they were built, nor were they built in the time frame that they said they were built in. Case in point, the Hotel Internacional, if I said that right, in Portugal, is a 5-acre complex of solid buildings, Gothic-style architecture, Victorian, whatever you want to call it. And this was built for the World's Fair. Yes, they built 5 acres of solid buildings in 52 days, is what they're claiming. That is so fucking asinine. That's beyond. And they even bitterly complained that they should have got it done sooner. How the hell are you going to do that? This is back in the 1800s when they were driving. The type of tools they were using was like a horse pulling a wagon. You know, damn horse and buggy and shit like that. You know, instead of a crane. You know, come on, man. How are you going to build these 10, 12-story cyclopean buildings in 52 days, 5 acres worth? I mean, it's just incomprehensible. And the lie goes on and on. They take the same line, put it in different places, different cities. San Francisco, Spokane, Washington, Omaha, Nebraska, Chicago, Illinois, New York City, New York. These are all towns, and as a matter of fact, the #1 city in the world right now, Austin, Texas, baby. Yes, we have Tartarian architecture right here in Austin, in its downtown, and I'm actually thinking even the state capitol itself is a Tartarian structure. And we'll get into that later. So, for any of you that don't know what this Tartarian deal is, You should pay attention. The reality of the Tartarian enigma is that there are buildings around us that we are told were built 120 years ago, 130 years ago, and that's not true. They were built much earlier than that. And some of these buildings may be 400 or 500 years old, 200 or 300. It's hard to say because we don't know the facts. And there's a reason we don't know the facts. It's because there's been a massive cover-up. This cover-up of the Tartarian Empire, the very existence of the Tartarian, several countries that were different, had the word Tartary in them, that were up around present-day Russia. This country has been obliterated from the history books. Why? It's uncertain. One of the reasons might be that there was, not certainly in all cases, but in some cases of these Tartarian situations, there were actual giants involved. Yes, I'm talking about people of incredibly large stature. And we know anybody who's taken a moment to do some hard research into the enigma of giants, listen, it's totally real. Back in the 1800s, everybody believed in giants. It doesn't matter that nobody believes in giants anymore or thinks that giants is an NFL team. Giants were real. They found their skeletons all over the place. There's so many newspaper articles they can't even, cover it all up. Even Abraham Lincoln, in one of his most famous speeches, when he was at Niagara Falls, the dedication of something, mentioned that the giants had looked out over this, same vista, this, same beautiful waterfall, etc. And, he was not talking about the captains of industry. He was not talking about the giants, people with giant character or giant, loving, giving hearts. He was talking about fucking giants. When is a giant a giant? A giant is a giant is a giant. And they're fucking giant. They're big motherfuckers. How big? Well, I don't know. The Cardiff man, who's just a mummified man who was discovered, I believe, in Illinois. He said, thousands of people saw him. He was on display. This is before they kind of got the whole thing under wraps. But he was 10 feet tall. That's a giant. 10 foot tall, that qualifies as a giant. One little known fact is an emperor of Rome, back in 300 AD, I believe, I'll have to put the name up on the screen, but I don't know if his name was Maximilian. I'll put that up on the screen. But this is a historical fact that this man was a giant. He was, I believe, almost 9 feet tall. He could eat 40 pounds of meat and 14 bottles of wine in one meal. A big motherfucker. He knocked a mule out with one punch. He outran a bunch of horses when he was a youth, and he got recruited by the Roman army. And he later moved up through the ranks and became a general, etc., and I guess then a senator, but ultimately became the emperor of Rome. But he was done away with because he became paranoid, that people were out to get him, etc. They probably were. Lots of intrigue back there in old Rome. So anyway, yeah, giants are absolutely real. And so that may play into the Tartarian reality. One way to sum it up, and I'm not sure if this is exactly true, but this is a way to bring about the cognitive dissonance or to explain to yourself or to others what this Tartarian thing is. If you want to boil it down to a couple of sentences, it's the idea that when the Pilgrims came to America and landed on Plymouth Rock, for which we have this Thanksgiving celebration that we just celebrated only days ago in 2019 here. It is November 30th right now. So with the idea that when the Pilgrims came across the Atlantic Ocean, came to America, landed on Plymouth Rock, that the Empire State Building and the Manhattan Bridge We're already here in America. All right? That's the idea. It's a lot to wrap your head around. It definitely brings a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's once you start seeing all of these facts put together, it's when you start to realize, oh my God, this shit's real. We know these Greek or Greco-Roman columns that they had on these big buildings, like their Senate buildings and stuff, with the big kind of roof that comes up like this at a very, not a very steep angle, a very opposite from steep angle, and the big columns up here. And they're very, they look very majestic, et cetera, et cetera. We think, oh, that's great artistic style, and they've been copied ever since then. The truth is, these buildings like that, also Shinto shrines, buildings in Japan, and all of your cathedrals, your Gothic cathedrals all throughout Europe, these were not built as houses of worship. No, far from it. These buildings were power centers. They were power stations. And each one of them got electricity from the air for free from the ether. And that's why you have these spires on all these old buildings and the globes. A lot of these globes are filled with mercury. I don't know exactly how the technology works, but there's been some YouTubers that have, especially from Russia, that have put out some good videos about the science of these power stations that were the buildings that we now use or call cathedrals. The Vatican, right? How many buildings do they have there? And then notice at the Vatican, they have an obelisk, right? You've got obelisks in these other places too. Well, how the fuck did an obelisk from Egypt get there? Well, they have a big story concocted about that. And it's not true. That obelisk was always there. And it's always had Egyptian hieroglyphs on it. And maybe they're not even Egyptian hieroglyphs. Maybe they're Tartarian hieroglyphs. So anyway, this is some advanced subject matter here that we're dealing with, this Tartarian enigma. Okay, what about the sister subject of mud flood? What is the mud flood? It always bugged me when I was a kid growing up watching TV when they'd show people in New York, like Welcome Back Kotter, or later on in life, Friends or Jerry Seinfeld. When they come out of that front door on their apartment, they come down those steps, and they're looking to either side of them, and there's these apartments down there where it's like they're sunk down below the ground. In other words, you could just stand right there next to the rail and piss on somebody's head. You know what I mean? It doesn't. Why did they make that? With it's obviously all the rain's going to go in there. They have to have some sophisticated rain gutters and pumps, I would imagine. Okay, trying to get this. Little transcription deal going. Bear with me for a moment, please. Okay, here we go. Mud flood. Where were we? Mud flood. There's pictures I'm showing on the screen right now. Various different mud flood type situations where the ground goes up at an angle in front of a building and you have windows disappearing into the dirt or covered up with bricks and mortar. They don't build buildings like that. You don't build a building in the side of a hill and have all the windows down there in a line where some of the windows on one side of the building is you see the full window and then it just gradually, the slope just gradually takes the other windows out. They weren't built like that. You don't build buildings like that. Yet we see this time and time again, and this is evidence of the mud flood. You see, especially in New York City and many other cities, what you see of this 6-7 story building or something like that is only maybe 75% of the building. There are several stories below the ground that were not built as basements. They were there the whole time, and the building was subsequently at some point covered up with mud. How did this happen? Through some natural catastrophe, maybe, or some man-made technology. The idea has come about that it was done with scalar weaponry, much like 911 was done with scalar weaponry from an airborne platform. So yes, they had airplanes back then. We know of these flying ships, the airships. I had Walter Bosley on the show, the ex-FBI agent who wrote the book about the airship flap. They called it a flap of the 1800s. And yes, these airships were real. Yes, there was men riding around in ships that looked kind of like blimps, but they were anti-gravity ships made out of wood and canvas. And this is absolutely true. So there could have been, if someone would have developed some type of scalar weaponry, then they could shoot it from an airborne platform, one of these airships. They've also found out with some volcanic activity that sometimes the very ground itself is liquefied, and so that would turn the ground into a mud flood and flood the buildings, and there you have it. The buildings are flooded with mud. The people die. 90% of the world's population dies. Whoever killed the Tartarians was so adamant about doing it that they didn't even mind wiping out 90% of humanity. And what lies do we have these days to cover up that fact, or to the excuse for what actually happened? And this is the Spanish-American War. Oh, so many people died of the Spanish-American War, then the Spanish influenza, Spanish this, Spanish that. Oh, can't get enough of your Spanish fucking lies. All right? It's a fucking lie. These people were killed by mud floods. This mud flood happened. There was a series of mud floods happening maybe even as late as the 1900s, the 20th century. I could go on and on and on about all of the evidence, and I'm going to. I'm going to share this evidence with you and tie up all the correlating facts, the correlating data. One of them is San Francisco. San Francisco, San Francisco, San Francisco. San Francisco wasn't always called San Francisco. And I don't know what it used to be called, but San Francisco is actually a Atlantean type city. And bizarrely enough, they have pictures of this. You can still get pictures online of what San Francisco used to look like, and it's just like paradise with these most amazing buildings you've ever seen. Venice-style waterways with gondolas and all this shit. It's mind-blowing. And plus these special like laser lights and stuff like that, stuff they didn't even have back then, or we were told that they didn't even have. And San Francisco was absolutely an Atlantean town, Atlantean city, or maybe should I say Tartarian. And once again, the World's Fair of 1918 was used to destroy most of these buildings. Because you see, what the World's Fair is used for is they claim that all these buildings, these huge, cyclopean buildings that have been there for hundreds of years, they claim that they built them just for the World's Fair. And that they're going to tear it down 11 months later. I mean, what? That doesn't even make sense. Why do this, huge effort, spend all this money to build these buildings to just tear them down in 11 months or 10 months? It doesn't make any sense. And when something doesn't make sense, that's a red flag. Definitely a red flag for Illuminati-style activity, and that's exactly what it was. Why would they create a mud flood? Why would they try to eradicate the Tartarians? Well, they weren't getting in line, and they didn't want to mind. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. But secondly, they wanted to erase the technology, make the technology go away, and have people start paying for electricity. Imagine that. Imagine where the world would be today if you and I did not have to pay for electricity. And let me tell you, I've had some pretty damn big bills recently. But me and my lovely assistant are going to be looking into that tomorrow. We're going to kick some ass and take some names. So that's it. We're not going to take any shit about the goddamn $500 electricity bill. Fuck that, huh? Ain't trying to hear about none of that. So anyway, yes, mud flood. Now, another thing that's connected with the mud flood is the orphan trains. They enacted a law in the U.S. Congress that's no longer a law, but it was that a single mother could not raise her children. And so they passed that law, and all the men who supposedly died in the Spanish-American War left their wives as widows, and they had children, but it was now against the law for a single mother to raise children, and so the government came by and confiscated everybody's children if they didn't have two parents. That's fucked up. And that is the system that we live under even today. And what did they do with these orphans? They took them all over the world. They changed their names, they gave them new names, they gave them new identities, and they were used to help repopulate the world. Absolutely fascinating, absolutely true. And so we have the enigma or the, mythos of the orphan trains from the 1800s, and now you know the reason for that. As far as claiming buildings or claiming that you built buildings that you didn't build, I'd definitely have to say that first place trophy goes to the Mormons. Because all that shit out there in Salt Lake City, they didn't build none of that shit. There's even a picture of one of these big Greco-Roman amphitheaters, or with the roof on it, that has a log cabin built under it. They're building shit out of mud, but yet they claim they built all this, the sanctuary and all that stuff. And I've been there to the Mormon church, the main Mormon church in Salt Lake City, and I've been inside that sanctuary where the regular people can go, that don't have the magic underwear. In other words, you can't go down there where the Mormons are during their Sunday service, but you can, as a tourist, go up there in the upper balconies and look at the weird rituals of the Mormons. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Mormon Brigham Young University is the only university in the United States of America that teaches something that's halfway true when it comes to the subject of archaeology or anthropology, because every other university you go to, even this one right here, UT, will teach you nothing but lies. Lie after lie after lie, and the only pseudoscience, false science, that has more lies and is based on more BS than psychology is, and that's pretty bad. Psychology is pretty bad. It would have to be archaeology and anthropology, because when you go and study those subjects in any major university, or any university for that matter, aside from Brigham Young University, you're going to be taught nothing but lies. And if you send your kids to study this, then they're going to be taught, hard-earned money is going to go to teach your kids nothing but lies. Fuck that. Thankfully, you have me here to tell you the truth. That's how it goes. We'll take a short break. Be back with you in a moment. Don't ever get caught off guard. Don't ever get caught by surprise. Well, that was 33 minutes. Does it seem like about 33 minutes, or does it seem like about an hour and 33 minutes?
Yeah, it seems.
I can just talk about my subjects almost endlessly.
Excited so knowledgeable about
You're good at it.
about my conspiracies.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to stop the damn camera.